All right. So this, I've just rewritten it for you. This is the claim that we're going to work on. Right? So I'll read it slightly. So stent, it has a metal body. There's an interior region that is a degradation promoting agent, an exterior region, and the exterior region has this biodegradable polymer and a therapeutic agent. So what you have in front of you is a patent application. This claim which we'll work off, and just imagine this is the only claim pending, and a piece of prior art. Okay, and what we're going to do is we'll form teams and we'll interview. Your job is to try and overcome this piece of art and that claim and use what's in the patent application to get you there. Okay, so in order to do that, what you're going to do is, these are the kinds of questions that you think about in advance of coming and interviewing a case with me. Okay, why would you interview a case? So let's look at that long 7-year prosecution history. Some of it may have been because the applicants did not make enough choices and narrowing them down quickly enough. That's certainly what happened. Others could have been that they didn't talk to the patent examiner and say, okay, let's understand and get to what subject matter is allowable. So the Patent Office encourages interviews with examiners. So sometimes it could be a misunderstanding of what the invention is, and that has happened because you're the experts, I'm not. I look at the art and I try and understand it as best as I can, but you're the experts, so you might bring somebody in to explain mechanism or terminology to me. So interviews are a great way to sit down with the patent examiner and see if you can hash out claim terms that is acceptable and allowable. And it's often helpful in short-circuiting the process to get to allowable, because that's what you want. You want a patent that's valid and enforceable, and so you can go out and protect your intellectual property and prevent other people from infringing it. So that's, think about what you're trying to get out of the interview, okay? And I say this because you do have situations where when the goal of the interview is not clear, the time is wasted. So the question was, when you interview the FDA for pre-IND meeting, you are beholden to the responses from the FDA. The question is the same thing from the Patent Office. Typically, I think the answer to that is generally, it's a maybe. And I say that because it depends on what information you provide and how you choose to use that information. Because at the end of the day, we are not in a position to make recommendations for you that are binding to you. It's your choice on how you choose to amend the claims. Okay? So during the interview, and when we do a couple of mock-up interviews, you'll see how it works. You'll say, how about this? I'd like to amend the claim in this fashion, and we will work through whether that's possible or not, and then there always ends up being a write-up of that's public information, okay? That it'll go something like this. Applicant and examiner reviewed the prior art, and applicant suggested amending the claim to include a metal stent body. The examiner said merely amending it to a metal stent would be insufficient to overcome the prior art. Okay? Now, you could go back and say, I don't care. I'm going to amend it to a metal stent body, and that's all I'm going to do. You know what I'm going to do, but that's a choice, right? So you're not beholden to me saying that will not overcome the prior art, but you're pretty much guaranteed that's not going to get you. So I hope that answers the question in that way. So, I think the concern is what do you put on the record? And people make, I think, more of this than it's due, and we'll talk about that when we actually do the exercise. Okay, always I would say, think about what arguments you want to come up with and how that's going to actually move the case forward. Okay? Now this seems pretty obvious, but it actually is a very difficult thing to get your arms around, which is, what is the invention? And if you know what your invention is, you're in a much better position to explain to the examiner and suggest changes that cover your invention, but don't cover the prior art. Okay, and it's not. It sounds easy, but actually is not. It's not trivial. Yes. So, right. So the question was, do I find in general that the applications start out broad and vague and narrow it down as the prosecution? Yes. The answer is very much yes. That often the claims are very, very broad, and to get a first action allowance is very rare because people write broad claims that are just not allowable. And as you go through the process, you find out, oftentimes you don't know what the prior art is, right? So despite all the work you may have done, sometimes you don't know. And so you don't know what the examiner is going to come up with and what the interpretation of the prior art that they find is. So you start out broad, and that's part of the negotiating process that happens within the patent office, and that's to be expected and embraced. You want to do that. You just want to do it in an expeditious manner to save yourself time and money. Okay? Yes, sir. The question is, can either the inventor or the examiner request an interview? The answer is yes. So I have called up applicants and I've said, listen, I feel like this case has gone on long enough. I have a suggestion. Amend it this way, and I think this case is allowable. They might tell me to go away, and that's fine. But yes, we can, and encourage to actually, if we see allowable subject matter, the Patent Office encourages us to call applicants and suggest it to them. Once again, to my point, that you're not obligated to take that suggestion. You might well say, thank you very much, but that does not cover my invention, and it's too narrow, it's too whatever, and I don't want it. Okay, very good. So at least, we have a sense of where we are. Yes, sir. So the question is, face-to-face interviews, or can it be done by other electronic devices? In the past, it almost always was face-to-face. Now you can do it in other ways. I have a lot of telephone interviews in which they'll send me a proposed claim amendment. We'll look at the art essentially together. We have opportunities and availability to do like Skype-type webcast interviews. Sure, we can do that also. If you're in the DC area, typically they will show up in person. And certainly if you're bringing an inventor, I've had those happen on the phone also, but sometimes they will take the time. In fact, I know one person, particularly from Boston, that brought the inventor down with the actual invention, which is the first time it's ever happened to me. I said, this is what we're looking to cover. And can we work with you and define claim terms that cover the invention? That was very helpful because sometimes it's very difficult to visualize what it is that's going on. In this case, it was a product, so they could show it to me. All right? But we try and be as accommodating as possible. We have to have prior permission to do certain types of electronic communication, but telephone interviews are not a problem. Face-to-face always works. What is the real-world application of the claimed invention? This is something for you to think about. You don't necessarily have to tell me during the interview, but something, again, to ground your interview and decide how you want to proceed. It's always helpful to know when you have an invention what you plan to use it for, because that helps you decide what claim scope matters and what claim scope doesn't matter to you. Okay, this is a very common failing. Does your response address all the rejections? Does it overcome all the art, and the amendments actually help? Oftentimes I found that applicants, even after interviews or even during interviews, will make suggestions that would not actually overcome the art. So that is not, it doesn't help you. Right? You essentially wasted time saying, well, what if I change it from pink to blue? Well, you could, but that's not, the application says it could be pink. Okay, well, that's not helping. So it's worth thinking through, what the prior art is as well, and does your proposed amendments going to actually help? And if you have evidence to present, make sure that we can talk about it, and sometimes interviews are a good example, a good way for an applicant to say, what kind of evidence would be helpful to you, examiner, to overcome this art? Would it be helpful if we explained the mechanism? Would it be helpful if we showed a comparison with another device? Would it be helpful if we did this experiment to show the prior art patent that you've cited against us doesn't result in the same effect? We can talk about that, right? So that when you go ahead and you present evidence, it's evidence that matters and it helps you. And the last thing, I do want to emphasize this, and the Patent Office does really, we really do think of us as your friend and your guide through this process. We are not your adversary, because your goal and our goal is to have valid, enforceable patents. So, you might think, well, examiners are making our life particularly difficult. Well, that's true, because we're showing you all the art that's out there, and if you have broad claims that still cover the prior art, that claim is not valid. So we want to try and work with you to get claims that you can actually enforce, because the most useless thing is to have a patent that you're paying money for to keep alive, and you try and enforce it, go to court, it's not valid. That's very expensive. So always think of us as a partner and a guide in the process, and not your adversary.